My wife watered my dead brother every day and never knew. I committed the perfect murder, and my wife watered the grave every single morning. For 2 years, she sat on our couch drinking her coffee, totally unaware that my brother's rotting corpse was buried inside the massive glass terrarium right next to her. When she finally found out and called 911, the SWAT team tore my house apart. But here is the insane part. I didn't go to federal prison for homicide. Let me tell you exactly how I beat the FBI, faked a DNA test, and why it all started with a demonic goat. It was the late summer of 1997, in a quiet, isolated logging town in the Pacific Northwest. The kind of town where the air always smells like damp pine needles and everyone knows your business. I was 17 years old, highly ambitious, and obsessed with true crime. I had just passed the physical and written exams for the State Police Academy. My ultimate dream was to become a homicide detective. To me, my father was a quiet, stoic mechanic who worked on diesel trucks. His hands were perpetually stained with grease, and he worked long hours to make sure I had everything I needed. He was my hero, my rock. But the day before my final FBI background check was scheduled to clear, my father vanished. He didn't leave a note. He didn't pack a bag. He just walked out into the dense woods behind our house and never came back. At first, my mother and I thought he had just gone for a long hike to clear his head. But 3 days later, state troopers showed up at our front door. They weren't looking for a missing person. They were looking for a ghost. The detective sat me down in our kitchen and told me a story that shattered my entire reality. 12 years earlier, in 1985, an entire family of 5 had been brutally murdered in a secluded cabin 2 states over. It was a botched robbery turned into a massacre. The killer had left nothing behind except a few bloody partial fingerprints on a doorframe. For over a decade, the case was completely cold. But in 1997, the state police launched a massive, new automated fingerprint identification initiative. They were sweeping historical records across multiple states, and the net was finally closing in on our little logging town. My father knew the sweep was coming. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a family annihilator who had been hiding in plain sight. He knew that the moment his fingerprints were run, his 12-year secret would be exposed. And more importantly, he knew that the son of a serial murderer could never, ever become a police officer. So, he decided to do the only thing he thought would protect my future. He went into the mountains to commit suicide so I wouldn't bear the shame of his trial. But I was smart, and I knew the trails he used. I found him the next evening, standing on the edge of a jagged cliff, staring down into a rocky riverbed. He was crying, begging me to let him jump. He confessed everything to me right there on the cliff. He told me about the cabin, the panic, the blood. That was the exact moment my lifelong dream of being a detective died. The righteous justice I believed in evaporated. In its place, a cold, calculated, biological instinct for survival kicked in. I pulled him back from the edge. I told him I didn't care what he had done in the past. He was my father, and I was going to protect him. As we stood there in the chilling wind of the valley, trying to figure out a plan, I felt a heavy, unsettling gaze upon us.
I can feel a heavy stare.
I turned my head and
It's
saw
a
it.
wild mountain goat.
Standing on a ridge about 30 yards away was a wild mountain goat. If you have never looked a goat directly in the eyes, you don't know true fear. Unlike humans or predators who have round or vertical pupils, goats have horizontal, rectangular pupils. It gives them a wide field of vision, but psychologically, it makes them look utterly alien. Those eyes are dead, devoid of any recognizable emotion or soul. In Western occultism, the goat is the symbol of Baphomet, the manifestation of the devil. It triggers a primal, irrational terror deep inside my brain. It stared at me with that calm, sinister void. An idea formulated in my head, dark and perfect. "We need a scapegoat," I whispered to my father. Literally, I picked up a massive piece of granite. I walked toward the animal. It didn't run. It just watched me approach with those evil, horizontal eyes. I raised the rock, and I beat the goat to death. It took several strikes, but I felt absolutely nothing. My father and I dragged the bloody carcass into a deep, hidden crevice in the rocks, covering it with soil and heavy branches. "Your sins are buried with this animal," I told him. We sneaked back home under the cover of darkness. From that day on, my father became a phantom in his own house, hiding in the basement. We thoroughly wiped down the entire house, scrubbing every surface with bleach to destroy his fingerprints. But we missed one. 2 weeks later, the police found a single, latent thumbprint on the underside of a kitchen cabinet. They ran it. It was a 100% match to the 1,985 cabin murders. My father was officially named the prime suspect and put on the FBI's most wanted list. Because they believed he was on the run, the local sheriff came to my house to collect my DNA. They needed my genetic profile to compare against any future evidence or unidentifiable bodies they might find. Now, keep in mind, this was 1,997 inches a small rural precinct. Forensics wasn't what it is today. They didn't use mouth swabs. They used a simple blood spot collection card. I had anticipated this exact scenario. The night before the sheriff arrived, I went down to the basement and drew a syringe of my father's blood. I dropped it onto a blank collection card I had stolen from a local clinic. When the old sheriff sat at my dining table, ready to prick my finger, he looked at me with deep pity. He saw a good kid whose life was ruined by an evil father. "I'm so sorry, son," he said. I made my hands shake. I hyperventilated. I acted like I was having a panic attack. I clumsily reached across the table and knocked a glass of water directly onto his uniform. "Jesus!" he yelled, standing up and turning around to grab a towel from the sink. He took his eyes off the table for exactly 4 seconds. It was all I needed. I slipped the blank card into my pocket and swapped it with the pre-prepared card containing my father's blood. I squeezed a tiny pinprick of my own blood onto a tissue to make it look like he had successfully pierced my skin in the confusion. When he turned back around, he sealed the card in an evidence bag. The police walked out of my house with my father's DNA, perfectly cataloged and legally registered under my name. It was the ultimate insurance policy. After the heat died down, my father left town. He lived entirely off the grid, pouring battery acid on his fingertips to destroy the ridges, taking cash jobs under fake names. I moved to a different city, went to college, and got a degree in biological sciences. I became obsessed with closed ecosystems. In my spare time, I built massive bioactive terrariums. For those who don't know, a bioactive terrarium is not just a glass box with dirt in it. It is a fully functioning, self-sustaining slice of nature. You start with a drainage layer of clay hydroballs, separated by a synthetic mesh. Then you add a specific substrate, a mix of orchid bark, peat moss, charcoal, and sphagnum. But the most crucial part is the cleanup crew. You introduce microfauna like springtails and tropical isopods. These insects act as the digestive system of the tank, rapidly consuming mold, decaying plant matter, and any biological waste, converting it back into rich soil. Under the intense heat and UV lamps, the humidity stays at a constant 80%. It is the perfect environment for rapid biological decomposition. My life was quiet and controlled until 2001, when my mother passed away. I held a small funeral for her back in our hometown. It rained heavily that day. As I stood by the grave, I saw a figure standing under a black umbrella near the tree line. It was my older brother. I haven't mentioned him yet because, frankly, my family tried to pretend he didn't exist. He ran away when I was very young. He was born with a severe, horrifying congenital defect in his eyes. His irises were deformed, leaving him with horizontal, rectangular pupils. Exactly like a goat. Growing up, the local kids called him a demon. The extreme religious folks in town said he was the spawn of Satan, marked by the beast. Even my parents couldn't hide their discomfort around him. He was resentful, quiet, and deeply disturbed. After the funeral, I went back to the old house to pack up my mother's things. I walked into the basement and froze. My brother was sitting there in the dark, and sitting across from him was my father, who had secretly returned to pay his respects to his dead wife. My brother had taken off his dark sunglasses. Those dead, horizontal eyes fixed on me. He knew about the 1,985 murders. Everyone knew why my father was a wanted man. He spoke with a slow, chilling drawl. Well, well, look who's hiding in the dark. He didn't ask for money. He didn't threaten to call the police immediately. He just smiled, tilted his head, and whispered, "Doesn't a killer have to pay the price in blood?" He was a sociopath holding a lit match over a barrel of gasoline. He could turn my father in at any second just for the thrill of destroying us. But honestly, it wasn't just the threat of blackmail that drove me to do what I did next. It was his eyes. Staring at him, all the primal terror I felt towards that goat on the cliff came rushing back. He wasn't my brother anymore. He was just a piece of biological material. He was the second scapegoat. I convinced my brother to travel back with me to my new house, promising to give him my mother's inheritance money. When we got to my home, I showed him my reptile room. The room was sweltering, illuminated by the eerie red glow of ceramic heat emitters. As he leaned over to look inside a massive 200-gallon bioactive enclosure I had just built, I grabbed a heavy braided rope. I wrapped it around his neck from behind. He thrashed wildly, knocking over terrarium supplies, his fingernails digging into my arms. But I was stronger. I held the garrote tight until his body went completely limp. There was no grand emotion, no regret, just a problem that had been permanently solved. But burying a body in the shallow woods is what terrified amateurs do. They always get caught when a dog digs up a bone or a hiker spots disturbed earth. I had a much better grave right in front of me. I emptied the massive 200-gallon glass tank. I laid my brother's body at the very bottom, curled up tightly. I covered him with the drainage layers, the mesh, and hundreds of pounds of the bioactive substrate. I planted lush tropical ferns and sprawling pothos vines over the soil. Then, I dumped thousands of isopods and springtails into the tank. I cranked the heat lamps up and increased the humidity misting system. My living room became a high-speed biological incinerator. The insects and the fungi went to work immediately. There was no smell in the house, because the charcoal layer in the soil and the airtight glass doors neutralized the gases of decomposition. For 4 years, I sat on my couch, drinking coffee, watching television, while less than 10 feet away, my brother was being systematically erased by nature. But I didn't just let him rot blindly. I was conducting an experiment. Every few months, I would drive back to the mountains where I killed the goat in 1997. I would check the goat's skeleton to observe its natural rate of decay in a temperate climate. I meticulously adjusted the temperature and moisture in my terrarium so that my brother's body decayed at an accelerated, yet perfectly calculated, rate. By 2005, 4 years after I killed him, he was nothing but clean, bleached bone. His skeletal structure mirrored exactly what a human body would look like if it had been left in the wild since 1997. It was time to close the trap. I packed his bones into heavy-duty plastic bins, drove back to my hometown in the dead of night, and scattered them at the bottom of the exact same rocky riverbed where my father had tried to jump. 2 weeks later, I bought a burner phone and called in an anonymous tip to the state police. "There are human bones in the valley," I told them, and hung up. The police rushed to the scene. They found the skeleton. They sent the bones to the state forensics lab. Because the body was completely skeletonized, there were no fingerprints, no dental records to match, since my brother had never been to a dentist. The forensic anthropologists determined the bones belonged to a male in his 30s or 40s, dead for approximately 8 to 10 years. The timeline matched my father's disappearance perfectly, but to be absolutely certain, the police needed DNA. They extracted genetic material from the marrow of the femur bone. They used a technique called YSTR analysis. For those unfamiliar, YSTR testing isolates markers on the Y chromosome, which is passed down virtually unchanged from father to son. It traces the direct male bloodline. My brother, my father, and I all share the exact same Y chromosome profile. The police took the DNA from the bones, which belonged to my brother, and ran it against the blood sample they had collected from me back in 1997. But remember the trick with the spilled water? The blood they had on file for me was actually my father's blood. The lab results came back. It was a 100% confirmed paternal match. The police officially declared that the skeleton belonged to the 1,985 family annihilated. They ruled his death a suicide by jumping. The FBI took him off the most wanted list. The case was closed forever. My father was legally dead, entirely free to live out the rest of his days under the radar, which he did until a heart attack took him naturally in 2021. I had executed a masterpiece of forensic manipulation. But pride comes before the fall. Like all psychopaths, I suppose my ego was my undoing. Years later, I married a wonderful woman named Claire. We lived a peaceful life. She loved the bioactive terrarium in the living room, always marveling at the vibrant plants and the cute little frogs and lizards I kept inside. One night, we were drinking wine. I was feeling invincible. I wanted an audience. I wanted someone to recognize my sheer, unadulterated genius. So, I told her the story. I framed it as a fictional script I was writing, but I included every specific detail: the dates, the DNA loophole, the bones, the terrarium. I watched her face as I spoke. I expected her to be amazed by the plot. Instead, I watched the color drain completely from her skin. She looked at me, then slowly turned her head to look at the massive glass tank glowing in the corner of the room. She realized that for the first 2 years of our marriage, she had been sitting on the couch, drinking her morning coffee, right next to the rotting flesh of her brother-in-law. She realized the beautiful green ferns she watered every week were fed by a murdered man. She didn't say a word. She stood up, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and called 911. The police arrived with a SWAT team. They took my confession deadly seriously. They brought in heavy equipment, smashed the glass of the terrarium, and bagged hundreds of pounds of soil. They tore apart the floorboards. They interrogated me for 72 hours straight. They desperately wanted to charge me with murder.
You all showed up.
But remember the biology of the tank? The isopods and springtails had done their job too well. There was zero trace of human DNA left in that dirt. The bones from the riverbed had been legally cremated years ago after the case was closed. My father and brother were both dead, making a new DNA comparison impossible. I had effectively committed a murder that no longer existed in the physical world. It was, legally speaking, just a scary story I told my wife. The detectives were furious. They were livid. They couldn't let me walk away. So, they scoured everything I owned. And in the rubble of my smashed terrarium, hiding among the ferns, they found a Mexican beaded lizard. It's a highly venomous, critically endangered species that I had purchased illegally on the black market years ago. A federal wildlife offense. So, the judge threw the book at me for smuggling an endangered reptile. I got 3 years. My wife divorced me, and my name is ruined in my hometown. But every night, when the lights go out in my cell, I lie in the dark and I smile. Because I know the truth. I beat the system. I beat the FBI. I beat science itself. And I owe it all to a pair of dead, rectangular goat eyes.